Hello and welcome to Fog of War. My name is Yaroslava Buchta. Today, co-hosting with me is Jonathan Fink, and this is a weekly podcast on how war shapes contemporary media landscapes and how media in turn shapes our understanding of war. In this weekly podcast, we dive into stories from the battlefield, unpack academic debates, and speak with those at the heart of it all, photographers, journalists, analysts, and media makers. Our mission is to uncover the complex interplay between truth and narrative in times of conflict. And today we're thrilled to be joined by Serhii Korovaynyi, an editorial and portrait photographer based in Kiev. Serhii has documented the Russian-Ukrainian war, Russian war crimes, and much more. And his work is featured in renowned outlets such as Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the Time magazine. Beyond his remarkable career, I also have a personal connection with Serhii because he was once my photography lecturer at the Kiev-Mohyla School of Journalism. And in this episode, we'll discuss the ethics of war photography, how images shape public understanding of conflict, and what it actually takes to document history as it unfolds, especially as it unfolds as in your own country. So grab your headphones and let's step into this fog together. And I would start with a more general question. So, how would you say that the full-scale war changed the Ukrainian photography and the way photographers communicate with each other? And what is the place for Ukrainian photographers in the world media now? And how has war changed your personal photography and you as a professional and as a person?
Yeah, hi Yaroslava, hi Jonathan, and everyone who's listening to the podcast. It's a pleasure to be here, to speak here. And I mean, you're absolutely right. The question is very broad and it touches lots of changes which have been happening in Ukrainian media landscape, in Ukrainian photography industry for the past almost 3 years of a full-scale Russian invasion in Ukraine. And I would say for many of us Ukrainian photographers, for myself, for sure, it wasn't a choice or goal to become a war photographer in a full sense of this word, but like in February 24, 2022, war came to us directly. Of course, it was like war happening since 2014, and many of my colleagues were covering fighting and situation in Eastern Ukraine, but like after 2022, it's much different. It touches like everyone, and including every photographer. So many of us became war photographers by force, I would say, and I'm proud, honestly, for for so many my colleagues who jumped to this awful adventure, who could continued or started document Russian invasion, Ukrainian resistance, and it's dangerous. Obviously, it's less dangerous than being a soldier on the front line, but more dangerous than being a civilian in a relatively safe place. It's dangerous and challenging psychologically because we face directly destinies of people, stories of people who survived, who experienced very tough things, and our mission is to show those stories to the outer world. And so, as this transmission is as this part of this chain of a story from characters to outer world, to our audience, it's very important, but very hard role sometimes, especially if we're talking about stories of tortures, war crimes, missile attacks, prisoners of war, etc., etc. And of course, since 2022, a giant media attention, let's say, came to Ukraine. Media started to cover it with like 10 100 times more intense than the war before, the limited conflict in Eastern Ukraine. And Ukrainian photographers got an opportunity to start working with big world media to show their work to Western audience, to international audience. I mean, pragmatically, Ukrainian photographers also got an opportunity to earn money with their work, which never was the case, and it's also like important. So they be able to focus only on reporting, and so the industry definitely got boost, and it still, there are many opportunities for Ukrainians to showcase their work, to tell those like important stories. And of course, for us, it's much more valuable and important to do it, as it's like our homework, war in our home war in our country. Like, I don't know, a few months ago, I went to my, like, Misaldi brief hit the residential house, like 150 meters from my own house. And it was like very challenging psychologically task to document this attack. So there are different aspects, and Ukrainian photographers in general are such well done in adjusting to this new reality and telling stories of Ukraine in the world. But I also must say that there are many great and brave foreigners who came to Ukraine, not once, not twice, not parachuting, doing stories my war in Ukraine and in 2 weeks and leave, but those who come repeatedly and caring about stories, doing them with a great attention to details, with a great empathy. And I also have to say that I have tremendous respect to foreigners as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question. So since you were talking about the commercial side and the personal side, so it is not a secret that when you come to some, say, the occupied village, and there are many stories to tell, right? So you have to pick. And on a personal side, something that I've heard from other journalists is that you want to tell every single one of the stories because they're equally horrible, and each one of the stories is a tragedy. So you have to be very sensitive to those. But at the same time, you understand that not every photograph kind of sells. So how do you navigate this this sort of clash and this duality between the commercial side and the views and the editorial policy, and the personal side of your work and what you capture at your photos?
Yeah, honestly, it's not work exactly like you described, because when you get to place, when you get to the situation, you do your best to capture everything possible. Every person who give you access to their story, to their life. Personally, I try to follow. I almost never think that this would be a good story to publish in Reuters or like Wall Street Journal, and this one just will not sell. And maybe it is a difference, some kind of difference between Ukrainians who working on in our war and like our colleagues, that I guess every one of us are trying to photograph as much as possible, tell as many stories as possible. And yeah, of course, like, I don't know, 10% of them, 5% of them will be published and get enough attention. But there is also an aspect of documenting this war, stories of this war for history, for archiving. Maybe there is also a part of it to talk to people who, as in your example, survived the occupation. So maybe they be able to share their stories, and it will be also maybe living for them to share it. So you also like is cautious about it. And also, like, we are as media by ourselves with some Ukrainian photographers became like I don't know, Instagram celebrities with thousands of hundreds of followers, and it's also like way to show stories of people with their like personal blogs, for example. But there is, of course, some truth in this take you introduced, because I remember we had this conversation with a friend of mine from Belgium. She's like amazing writer. We worked on stories about Kharkiv villages near Kharkiv, which were liberated in like one of the first counteroffensives of Ukraine. Not even in fall 2022, but like in summer 2022, just near Kharkiv. And of course, like first it was Bucha, Borodianka, Makariv, etc., etc. With like world got shocked of cruelty of Russians who killed civilians, and we all saw these pictures. And then a friend of mine from Belgium, she said, "Yeah, I mean, now it is so hard to invent, like to come up with a story which will be interesting for our readers after Bucha, because we already got to this level of cruelty, to this level of shock, and it was awful conversation, because we both understood that it's tremendously wrong, because every story gets attention, should get attention. Every person who suffered occupation or living near the front line, their story should be told. But there is also an economy in it. There's also like a potential in those stories. So after some time, we had to get creative to come up with approaches to tell those stories, to some angles, to some frames. And it's not something we like, because I personally think that those stories are awful enough and important enough to be told as they are. So, but yeah, that's the world. And of course, I mean, now, like after 3 years of a big war, it is so hard to keep this attention. And we are tired of war in Ukraine, and of course, our audience is abroad are tired of Ukraine everywhere. I don't like judge or blame, but I understand that it's our job now to create something to keep this attention. And yeah, we thinking about how to approach stories creatively, in spite of every of them just worth telling without any specific approaches, if it makes sense.
I've got a quick question to jump in. I recently did a really interesting interview with Yaroslav Trofimov, who's got a book out, and of course he is a very renowned sort of foreign correspondent. But of course, he talked about the dissonance of doing his profession, reporting on a war zone. But of course, it's his own country, it's his own people, it's his own language. It's somewhere which he has a greater familiarity with. And he talked about the challenges of remaining, I would say, objective under those circumstances. I mean, how professionally do journalists and photojournalists especially deal with that?
Can you clarify, deal with this dissonance of working in our own
Yes.
country?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, again, I didn't choose, and as well as Yaroslav, we didn't choose to report on this specific war, because it's our war in a way. And so there is like no question of do it or not because we were too close. It's our way probably to cope with this reality, to report on it. And I mean, of course, we try. I try to be as professional as possible, as objective as possible, and to our luck, I don't know, is the word luck working here, but this war is pretty much black and white. So it is really hard to mess up because there is like a clear invader and clear victim. So I don't see a big challenge in like remaining a journalist, remaining objective on covering it, because in like most stories, readers or viewers can decide by themselves what's going on here. You just report on facts, and you are sure that like this is a narrative which will not be in conflict with your like Ukrainian identity. But for me, it's even easier than for Yara or for writers, because I'm doing photos, and of course there is like a tremendous level of subjectivity in picking up stories, in picking up angles, everything. But I'm also like, if it's, I don't know, if the most simple things, for example, like news photography, if it's a missile attack, you go and photograph like debrief and people, victims and emergency workers clean the debrief. So it's no, you just do your work, like taking pictures, and this is like a message by itself, right? Like destroyed residential building, but of course there are stories which are like much more nuanced. But yeah, in general, I don't see like big challenge in it, and also like we get used to it. I'm living in Ukraine all the time, not coming coming to Ukraine for like 3 weeks shift and going. So this is like a normality for me. I see dissonance. I see that something is wrong when I getting out of Ukraine, actually, because it's something like your body feels different. You don't anticipate some kind of danger all the time. So, but being in Ukraine, it just like after 3 years of almost 3 years of Big Four, it also doesn't feel like something wrong. And this is like big problem in it. But I guess it's a problem for tomorrow, if it makes sense also.
Actually, my next question would be partly related to that. It's kind of like the fullness of information and how you pick stories and how you say also like related to morality. So I remember there were a couple of discussions in Ukrainian Facebook groups of photographers, for example, as how you film funerals of soldiers. Well, for example, there was this recent funeral of a mother and 3 daughters who were killed by Russian missile in their apartment in Lviv. And it was a very, actually, from what I remember, this is the funeral that was probably the most covered in media. I just saw like numbers of pictures with this like 4 white coffins through Lviv. And I remember I saw your pictures on that. And what struck me was that some would choose pictures that would be like literally portraits of these women in coffins. Your pictures were like a bit more subtle. There was a discussion on should you film or should you take a picture of, for example, grieving parents over the coffin, even if you have a permission to do that. So how do you navigate this kind of challenge of, I don't know if it's a challenge, but how do you navigate this question of what to photograph, what to leave aside? And then you say that we were talking about objectivity. Yes, you can take a picture, but obviously you choose something to be there and to be published. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. I guess that's a dilemma we face almost every day on doing our work. Is also this balance we seek to get to, but always fail in like value of taking pictures and showing them to the world, and kind of like personal space and safety of our protagonists. And it's never an easy question. I've participated in so many of these discussions, and we just don't know the answer. Like let's start from the example you had of Yaroslav Basilevich and his it's a man from Lviv whose wife and 3 daughters. Youngest one was 5, I guess, were killed by Russian hypersonic missile in Lviv. And I was in like minutes after the strike. I just happened to be in Lviv that morning and was on near the place. I photographed it. And it was like a reportage. So there, and situations like this, I photograph everyone. Unless people will tell me not to photograph them, but then I'll think twice what to publish, because I perfectly understand that people there are in shock, basically. And even if they were okay with me photographing them, maybe because they just like didn't care, because they had this tremendous stress, as 100% Yaroslav had that morning. So I have a picture of them, a picture of him. And then some of us say that we must do it, we must show it to remind Ukrainians and international audience that there is still war in Ukraine. Ukrainians are dying, even in like far from the front line. But I consider this take a bit not outdated, but it just like those horrors have been happening for 3 years. Those horrible strikes, terrorist attacks on Ukrainian cities almost like every week or so, and like nothing really changed. We should remind people, but we also should be very, very delicate and empathetic to people who might then get re-traumatized or just super upset of seeing their faces in every media after they already survived the attack or death of their families. So there is no easy answer for me. I photograph, but then I think, and in this question, in this situation in Lviv, I guess it was worth publishing, because it was like some outstanding situation, outstanding by its cruelty attack. And then, the funeral thing, we often, Ukrainian photographers, we often photographing funerals of soldiers, for example. And I believe it's important thing to do, because again, we should remind that people are dying. Then young guys or older guys, women, like young girls, like a few horrible deaths of female medics just happened recently, like Kirat Sibuch or Alpaca from Hospitaliers Battalion. And in many cases, those funerals, I go personally to photograph. They are public, so relatives or like organizations, I don't know, post on Facebook that like it's gonna be funeral, come and pay tribute to the fallen heroes. So I consider this is that people are okay with them being in the spotlight, because once you get this Facebook post, for example, out, you can't control that who will come. Definitely journalists will come. And I almost never photograph dead people, people in coffins. I don't see how it is, how will it help to shape the narrative. I guess it in many cases there are things you can show without showing victims directly. There are many other approaches how to talk in general. It's like next level, how to talk about this war without showing only funerals and missile attacks and soldiers from the front. There are so many stories out there, but the problem is for me personally, and for maybe some other photographers, that those stories are out there, like funerals out there, missile attacks out there. It's so, in a way, it sounds horrible, but it is almost easy to go and shoot them because it's understandable. And I guess now, the third year of war, we need to look for other more deep, under photographed, recognized stories and communities which also participate in this war, suffer about this war, or participate in the war, but are not as easy to access than again missile attacks. But it's like a very general conversation, but it's time to start it, I guess.
Yeah, actually, about these deep stories, I remember one of the stories, and if I'm not mistaken, it was you who took the pictures of the family of Susval and Volyn, and the story of this whole family. So, for our listeners who have not read it, it's a Reporters Media story about basically the central part of it is the person whose family has been through all the wars happening in that region, including the Polish-Ukrainian clashes within the World War II. And his son was killed as the result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I think his three grandchildren are fighting. And that story actually struck me because this is something that I feel like Ukrainians are kind of facing both ways, because on the one hand, you have to tell the world the narratives of your country and promote the stories and explain the world who you are, because Ukraine sort of emerged on the world map in 2022. And then on the other hand, you also have to learn about yourselves and dive into these stories and understand of actually what is going on there. So if you could tell a little bit more about that type of story. And it was also published after the full-scale invasion started, so it's not, it's not a very obvious thing to publish, I would say, I guess. And what do these stories bring in, and how is it for you as a Ukrainian to be, on the one hand, a part of this debate of who we are and where are we moving, and on the other hand, needing to communicate this at the same time to the foreign audience?
Yeah, I guess this is strengths of Ukrainian media, good Ukrainian media, and good Ukrainian journalists and photographers to look for this kind of stories. Any foreigner would like never pay attention to, because it's almost too complicated even for us to find it. And I'm proud to work with one of the best Ukrainian media, as you mentioned, reporters who are doing this kind of stories. We just finished a magazine about love in hard times, all kind of love in darkness, and it's not only like direct stories of couples in a big war, but all kind of things. So I hope it will be a good magazine. And I guess it is very important to tell about Ukraine within like very personal small stories of all kind of people. Again, there are definitely an important role of news photography, but not everyone have to do it, and we should think about this like smaller, more subtle, more gentle ways to find a way to talk about it. I did like a small reportage about it calls last day of Pokrovsk this summer, when there is a city in eastern Ukraine, which is now under threat of Russian occupation because Russians are advancing towards it. So I spent like a good few weeks in it over summer, just photographing like very small, very regular stories and things like, I don't know, train station, people in cafes, or like I don't know, bakery, which I would never pay attention, like, I don't know, in the beginning of war, because it was so many action things going on, action stories, and now I feel bad that I was doing only action things and action stories. And so I saw the transformation of the city from being very alive, being an vital transportation hub and place of meeting for like soldiers and families, etc., to a totally empty, deserted place. And it was really scary. And at that time, the Kursk offensive began. So Ukraine started doing its operation on Russian soil in Kursk. And I saw like many of my colleagues rushed there, and I was like dying of FOMO. I was dying of desire to go there and report of ongoing operation. And honestly, I'm so happy now that I thought that I'm so, look, there are so many of your colleagues who are covering that thing, but you have story here, and you should continue doing it. And now I guess it's one of the best things I've produced, like for this war. This like there are almost no fires, missile attacks. There are some situations from the front line, but also not like super dramatic. And I guess that's what I wanna continue to do for the next like months or years of this war. We'll see. I'm from Eastern Ukrainian region of Donbass, from Donetsk region, which my hometown is like occupied since 2014, and I was going back to the government controlled territories of Donetsk, Lugansk regions for this like 10, 11 years, and now I'm thinking of that this is like my part of Ukrainian story I should tell. Apart from like doing assignments for Wall Street Journal or like Spiegel, just to go to very like regular and almost boring places in Donetsk region, which are still under like Ukrainian control, and continue reporting there until it's not too late. So that's my take on it, my example. And I can't say that everyone should do it, and I'm so bad in it still, but that's kind of my thought process for the possible strategies for Ukrainian journalists and photographers, how to of another ways to report in this war.
And coming back to like the question of commercial side of things, for example, you work for Wall Street Journal. So will the stories be, so obviously after you take the pictures and then there's whole editorial process of people making decisions of like what goes in, what is left behind. And is it possible to sell such stories? Or because, for example, in the UK, and something that I remember from quite a recent speech by General Zaluzhny in Chatham House, for example, there were a lot of questions about Kursk, for example, and what he said is basically that, well, it's a military operation, not a televised, event, and people are dying. It's actually part of the war. And then, like, what's there? Do the stories actually get published, or do people still want to hear like loud stories about Kursk?
Yeah, well, I guess it's both. It's coming back to my idea of it is relatively easy to do news photography, at least for me, because it's a quick instant result. You go in somewhere, you shoot, you publish it quickly. Media will get your stories easily, your pictures, not stories, probably like just news pictures easily, and you get this like I don't know, good emotions about, oh yeah, I'm important, I'm covering war, and it's super hard to switch to slower storytelling. It's like it's challenging to slow down basically in your ways of approaching journalism. And well, I guess there is definitely a niche and a desire of medias to publish these stories, but it's not as easy to pitch them, to sell them. You should work on contacts, you should know editors and be able to talk to them in a like trust manner, so they pay attention on something which is not on the spot news, but which has potential to be published. I guess a very good example, a very good recent example was actually two stories by American journalist Lindsay O'Dario, who is working with the New York Times mostly, and she published one story, I guess from summer or even from earlier, about a boy, like small boy, 8, 9 years old, who used to live with his mother on the front line village, and his mother was working in a like military hospital, and he was just like hanging around, and then they had to leave because it became too dangerous to stay at that village. So she spent like days with this family, and it's a very regular routine stories of like this lady doing makeup before going to military hospital on like 10 cats hanging out around this boy who is like watching some like movie, but within this big battle for in Eastern Ukraine and context. This was a very good piece of storytelling. New York Times published it happily as a multimedia piece with videos and maps and everything. And another story by Lindsay was about a girl who had cancer, and because of the war, she didn't get her treatment in time. She went to Poland. She couldn't get treatment there, proper treatment. It was interrupted by this immigration. She came back. They couldn't do it also. Then Ohmedit Children's Hospital was bombed in Kiev. So it wasn't like because of Russian missile, but eventually this girl died because of cancer, because she couldn't get enough treatment in time because of the war. And Lindsay followed this family for like a few months, from the family being relatively happy and fighting for the life of the kid till the funeral of the kid. And that's a very powerful story, very powerful. So I guess there is definitely a niche about it. I talked recently to photo editor from Netherlands, and asked like, what kind of stories are you looking for from Ukraine? And he said, in general, we're looking for stories about hope. So see, like places like Reuters or AP or like maybe even Wall Street Journal wouldn't probably publish. Wall Street Journal probably would. They publish my story about Pokrovsk, so so it was a good example. But news agencies wouldn't. But there are so many papers out there looking for interesting and underlooked stories about Ukraine. It's again hard to get there. It's hard to negotiate, to publish. The industry is pretty much not super open for people who are not like familiar with it, and it's also one of the barriers for Ukrainian journalists to publish more, because we were very much pretty much disconnected from world photojournalistic industry. We're now just starting to find those avenues to publish our works, and it's a hard path. Sometimes also like there is language barrier. Simply people just like who are doing amazing work in Ukraine don't know English and can't like I don't know, write a proper pitch. And it's also a question about education for the journalistic education in Ukraine. but it's it's a bit different topic. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely think that there are ways of publishing it, but it's also not. It's not like, I don't know, profitable. It's you spend much more time and money on logistics, on getting access. It's mostly about time of producing story, which will never be paid back equally. But so we should we should combine. I try to combine it. I do assignments where sometimes I shoot like portraits of I don't know, like politicians for some papers, or like something which I'm not like tremendously interested in. But on like and then I'm going to like Donetsk region and spending time there with like old women doing their gardens, which would probably would never be published like as such story. But that's what is important for me, for example. And also it's pretty limited picture of world of publishing your work if you think only about papers. And there are like other opportunities. There are like I don't know, every decent European American city has a museum. Like, but how to reach to those museums? Like how to reach to, I don't know, small Polish festivals. That's yeah, like festivals, competitions, residencies, some very local papers, some self-publishing things, maybe books, zines. So there are other ways, and I'm pretty young photographer. I'm trying to still to comprehend this landscape, and I think it's same challenge for many of my colleagues, for many of my Ukrainians, how to make those stories which are not easily understandable and easily publishable, which is again slower and more subtle. How to show them to bigger audience. So that's quite a challenge.
And I've got a couple of questions to jump in with. I mean, there is, of course, a thriving domestic journalistic scene in Ukraine. How important is that as an outlet for you? Or are there limited financial opportunities with publications such as Kiev Independent, Ukrainska Pravda, Ukraina, and these various publications that do commission quite a lot of photo stuff, and of course Ukraina does a series of photo series on particular themes that, as you say, may not be of necessarily interest or comprehension to Western press. Is that important, or are there limited advertising revenues to be able to sort of create a thriving local photojournalistic community?
Yeah, I guess this is a duality in situation you just perfectly underlined. There is a importance, but there is also very limited financial resources, for example, and opportunities and like money which came to industry after Russian invasion came from international media, mostly Western media, and I think it's definitely important to. I mean, I work with Kiev Independent. I work with Ukrainska Pravda and with reporters and with Radio Free Europe, just because sometimes I want this story. I want to make the story so badly, and I want to do it quick, and I want it to be published. And I pitch stories to like to Kiev Independent, for example, or like to Radio Free Europe. It happens. It happens pretty often. But I guess it's very important to talk to domestic audience as well to keep up some level of discussion to give people all kind of different perspectives and stories, because I mean I guess it's the role of journalism. People don't have like time and desire to look for some complicated stuff by themselves. So that's why they go to media. So like this story Yaroslav mentioned about just like story of one family from Western Ukraine who like went through all kind of wars since World War One in Europe. That's something like up to us to find and to show. And I guess that it could, of course, it could inform Ukrainians, it could inspire Ukrainians, it could remind them what would happen if we fail of fighting Russia this time, because it happened many times like before. And it's amazing. Like now for Ukraine, it's an amazing time. We have country, we have opportunity to fight. It wasn't like this. So we should remind Ukrainians about this, Ukrainian journalists. But also, like, I guess it would be very hard for me to survive only being a journalist working with Ukrainian media. And it's I don't like to I don't like saying it. It doesn't sound good, and I know that many of my amazing colleagues work mostly with Ukrainian medias and doing an incredible job. But there are limitations in funding, in opportunities, in number of stories, in like, I don't know, I want to work on some story for like a week, but media would have a resource for like 1 or 2 days. And I can do it once, I can do it twice, I can do like 5-10 stories which are important for me in this rhyme. But I also have like family, and they will also want to donate to Ukrainian army. And so I mean, you perfectly understand it. So in my case, in my particular case, I mix it. I think it's tremendously important to work, for me, to work for Western audience. I don't like, I'm not employed by Wall Street Journal, but it's my primary client, and I just came for like two weeks trip with them, with all kind of stories to make. And I know that like it's a story Americans read, American politicians read, and now with like big shifts in American political landscape, it's like I don't know. I feel that my work is more important than ever working with American paper, and I do it with pleasure. But then like next month I'll probably do a few stories for Ukrainian papers, and then I'll probably do something again with old ladies doing their gardens in Donbass to my archive, and then probably I publish a book. But until the end of next month, my money will like sicken. So I'll look forward for another assignment by some like big, well, relatively big Western media. So that's like this.
And of course, photography
Yeah.
has certain outlays, financial outlays. The equipment's expensive. Printing, I would assume, digital's fine, but if you want to print those images in high resolution and even work with an editor, the expenses rack up. Well, before Yaroslava comes in with the final questions, I also wanted to just ask one that really launches off what you said there, the change in US politics. But not just that, we've seen over the last few years an increasing weaponization of the information sphere. We see words manipulated in social media. We see the use of memes and various other things. Is photography in some ways more difficult to manipulate or utilize for that kind of propaganda? Or is it just as vulnerable to Russian propagandistic methods? And therefore, how important do you see your role as fighting against not just the physical war of aggression, but actually the substantial information war?
Yeah, I'm not fighting any kind of physical war, and as in any interview and public speech, I want to give credit to all Ukrainians who are actually fighting on the front line, being like in the mud, dust, in trenches right now. So yeah, it's big thing. And saying this, yes, I think that what's going on now with the information, it's just crazy. It gives me like anxiety, honestly. What's going on now in like discussion about Ukraine in Western, not even media, in Western, like, I don't know, social media, in Twitter. What's going on in like with one person with very particular point of view buying like a giant platform and started to influence it directly. And again, as I told a few like questions earlier, I totally understand that people don't want to spend time on digging up truth, seeking truth. They read something once, twice, three times. They're like, yeah, it could be true. Maybe Ukraine, it's not as innocent as it says. Maybe Ukraine really is like wanting too much. How long can we support it? Like, I don't know, like Putin offers them a peace deal and they just are like arrogant not to take it and everything. And it is very, very scary to see that people consuming information without any context, without any desire to look for the context, and making decisions on it, and then making electoral decisions on it. I mean, now we have the elections in Romania, one of the closest Ukrainian allies in Eastern Europe, and they are very close to vote for another far right, pro-Russian, all this type of people candidate who became famous on TikTok. So it's very scary to see it. And more than ever, I actually see the importance of traditional media with a reputation, who cares about reputation, of being these beacons, these anchors of places where you can go and check more or less, is it actually true? Does it actually make sense? Because people will write anything they want in X or the TikTok, but maybe Wall Street Journal will check their the information on New York Times or Spiegel or Guardian. Or also, like in Ukraine, the media landscape is also very challenging, and like, of course, there are so many Russian narratives. Russians are trying to push them through social media, through Telegram, through again like TikTok, and maybe if Ukrainska Pravda or Hromadske or Kyiv Independent will write about it, it may be true. If the three will write about it, it's like most definitely true. So I think that traditional media is more important than ever, actually. And the same kind of thought process goes with photography. Then photographers who working with big media, with reputations, who care about their reputations by itself, will think twice, three times of manipulating. And of course, it's easy to manipulate photography. Okay, like you see what's going on the frame, and it's hard to like to change the what you see. You see like a woman crying near the house destroyed by Russian missile in Sumy. I photographed it like a few days ago, and then anyone could write it's. Sumy was hit by Ukrainian air defense by accident. So people without competence going to Ukrainian army, it's too dangerous to weaponize them more. Or it is Belgorod or Kursk was hit by Ukrainian American provided ATACMS stop sending ATACMS to Ukraine. So like photography, it's on the one hand is very protected by the nature of the medium, but on the other hand, it's like super easy to manipulate it by putting it in the wrong context. And once you put your picture on the internet, you don't control it. My pictures, once I post them on like, I don't know, Instagram or media I worked for published them on their page, they immediately stolen and republished by all kind of, from like Ukrainian institutions, Ukrainian media. It's good if they sign you, if they like quote you. It's like the best you can hope. From to like all kind of Russian platforms, or so. Yeah, it is. So yes and no. It's a long answer to a short question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I was like preparing for this podcast, your picture of the dog with the rescuer, it was just so simple to find it. I literally Googled it and I found it like in a high resolution, like very, very quickly, and some like it's everywhere. So my next probably the concluding question would be, I mean, I couldn't just leave not having asked it because you're like a war photographer. And the major question that arises and that I've encountered, for example, in my conversations with Ukrainian journalists, were censorship and access. And in general, this complicated relations with Ukrainian army, media, and what is to show, what is not to be shown. And I remember, for example, you posted a story about the first time you photographed HIMARS, which was like a pure accident that you bumped into it on the road. And so it happened that you were able to take this picture. So, and something that also comes up very often is that Ukrainian journalists, or actually some Ukrainian journalists, are prevented from going to certain places, such as southern Ukraine. So, has the situation changed now in any way? And how, okay, some journalists are reluctant to talk about it like as such, but like, how is the situation developing and what is there now?
No, I mean, I don't see any reason not to talk about it. And part of it is because I guess we in Ukraine are enjoying an incredible amount of freedom of press for the war country, incredible access to military, which would never happen in majority of our ally countries. And I know it by talking to people who worked with American, British, Israeli army, who literally controlled every step by photographers, everything they can or cannot photograph, or simply like denying any access to some operations. So saying this, I understand, of course, that there are things which might be done better from Ukrainian official side to improve the general coverage, and which will work not only better for journalists and audience, but for them also. And this example of access to the Ukrainian South during the 2023 counteroffensive is a good example of, or like even access to Kherson, city which was liberated, big city which was liberated in fall 2022 by Ukrainian forces and previously occupied by Russians. It just made no sense to prohibit access there because it was a big success story for Ukraine, for Ukrainian army. It was an opportunity to talk about the horrors of Russian occupation, and that people under Russian occupation still were looking for liberation for Ukrainian army, which is a perfect counter argument to Russian propaganda. So I guess in some cases, decisions of particular people, which are sometimes are too much concerned of safety or their own reputation, might be changed. But in general, I think that rules imposed by Ukrainian army of working with them are pretty reasonable, and in my practice, at least, most of questions or discussions about some particular pictures or access to some places or because of my own safety, because I mean, I want to go as far as possible. I want to go to edge positions to shoot as much as possible. But I know that once I'm working with some regiment, some brigade, it's their responsibility to could keep me alive partially, and they don't want problems for themselves, and they want me alive and well. So if they don't let me somewhere, sometimes it's just because it's too dangerous, just because it's dangerous, and sometimes it's to keep them safe, with like super simple examples of not of OPSEC, like not showing particular locations or numbers on equipment or anything, something which could be used by Russian intelligence to get some information, and then I mean, make harm, strike to some positions of people we had a good time with. I photographed them. They gave me tea and some waffles, and then I go to the safety, and they will be like killed because I posted something which I didn't have to. So yes, this is ongoing conversation. Sometimes it worse. Now I guess it's totally right. Now it's very interesting thing is happening in Ukrainian army of different regiments understanding that it is at their best interest to be public, to be kind of famous, because with familiarity comes donations and recruits. So I get messages from like press officers, "Hey, do you want to work with us?" Which was never the case. So we have so many problems and issues in Ukrainian media landscape, but this one is not the biggest, I guess.
In one of your interviews, you mentioned that if you compare your pictures and the pictures of Wall Street Journal photographers, others of your colleagues, your pictures just generally have more light in them, as like physically more light in your pictures. And I was just wondering, like, I mean, it was an interview of like a year ago, and like, well, first, is it still the case? And second, why do you think is this the case, or it was the case?
Well, why would I even say it in the first place? Yeah, I mean, it's a super complicated task to judge your own work, and I'm like super happy that again talking about like journal, but also some of the media people who are working in Ukraine are mostly know the country, no context, and in general are like I don't know, are very share our pain and want to tell us as many stories with the best possible way. So it's really, I mean, now it's hard to compare. It's probably make no sense to compare, honestly. But I'm looking for bright things in my photography, because it's also part of the process, part of our life, and I don't want to say it's so complicated. There are so many factors in the discussion of again of like self-censorship. What should you show? What do you want to show? What do you want to say with this message? What if I like show nice people having fun in Kiev weekend? Wouldn't it be part of pro-Russian propaganda in Western media very next day? So it's definitely part of this of the big story of war. But is it like now the best time and focus like what should you focus on? But I guess like my general photo process is of looking for or physically nice light, or for stories which can give a bit more hope, because there is like, I have a problem by myself of finding a hope and light now. So I definitely want to find it during my photography, and probably share it to, most importantly, to my fellow Ukrainians, I guess, because we are like, there is pretty much tough moment now for my country in our lives. Yeah.
And on a moral side, there's this major kind of academic and non-academic debate about aestheticization of violence. So basically, a nicely torn, limb lying somewhere there, and you post it, and then pornography of violence because people want to see more bodies, blood, and whatever. In my from again, like talking to Ukrainian journalists, I just feel like these debates are sort of outdated because this is not the case anymore. And then again, with Bucha setting up such a high, level of violence, you talked about that. It's already not the case. I mean, you can't even sell these stories because it's not novelty anymore. If you even look at the news cycle, there's nothing new about that. So, could you tell, a little bit more about that side of the whole work of, yeah.
Yeah, no, I guess the world is so tired of seeing victims that it just not working anymore, neither for Ukrainian nor for international audience. And it's not that I don't want, of course I don't want, I think it's not worth showing aftermath of missile attacks or funerals of soldiers. It's just it's not gonna impact our audience in any way near if we find some nuanced story of people who are in a, for example, in a tough situation, but they have agency to work the way out of the situation. And I guess that's much more fair image of Ukrainians, because in 2022, when the world gave us like 310 how many days to fall, we didn't fall, and even if we are clear victims of Russian aggression, we took someone took weapons, someone took something else in their hands. So we took destiny in our hands, and we started to work out the way from the situation. So I guess it's nothing wrong to show victims. It just makes no sense. And we talked about ethical part of discussion of trying not to harm and not re-traumatize people who survived something, who experienced something. But a part of it, it also makes no sense for your audience. So why don't you try to find some other ways to tell the story of Ukraine? But again, it is very very hard, and it takes knowledge, time for research, getting off understandable path of just chasing news. But I guess it's the only way now.
And just you kind of touched upon this thing, but well, obviously there will be, well, hopefully in like 50 years, 100 years, there will be books written about this war. And in the same way as we discussed during our photography classes, some other photographs taking over previous wars, like as World War II, and then later like Vietnam or other major like pictures that actually shaped the image of what we imagine as that war, right?
Mhm.
So what do you think, which pictures will leave and what makes pictures or like photos the ones that will get into the history books, and how will this war be imagined, probably?
Well, first of all,
Yes.
I feel the tremendous amount of optimism in your words, and I want to share it. That there going to be historical books about Ukrainian war with some of our pictures in it, which means that the story will not be written by Russia, and in some ways, Ukraine will survive. So that's my big hope now. And in 2024, I guess it's way too early to say which ones will get to the history books. Now, when situation is unfolding so fast within these weeks, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What will be the biggest news story tomorrow? But in general, as answering your questions, I guess there are three parts in taking like a successful picture, which will live long life. It should be technically executed well, more or less, and that's the least important one. Of course, it should capture something important or interesting in a way of like if it's a unique situation or like strong emotion. Like a friend of mine, I mean, okay, let's say that definitely pictures by Zhenya Malaletka of Mariupol, from Mariupol battle, of Mariupol will get to the historical books, and it mean part of it they were executed well, but they were done in a place where there were no other photographer, no other journalist, but their team, and so it's such unique, awful and unique situations they were taken in. So that's a good example. And third one is luck to be able to show it at the right time, to so the picture wouldn't get lost in many thousands of other images of war. So I guess it's really hard to predict, but yeah, Malaletka's work for sure.
Thank you very much for joining us today. It was a really great talk, and a separate compliment to your t-shirt. It's really great. Donetchina, yes. It brings me to the end of today's episode of Fog of War, and we hope you found this conversation as insightful and as thought-provoking as we did. We want to extend a huge thanks to Serhii Korovaynyi for joining us today and for sharing his stories, his experiences on documenting the realities of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. His work reminds us of the vital role photography plays in shaping how the world understands the conflict, and I hope that this conversation made it more clear and more understandable for our audience on how in general this field works. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone who will also find it meaningful. And you can also follow us on social media for updates and some behind of the scenes and some additional content. Thank you for turning into Fog of War, where we continue to explore the complex interplay between the truths and narratives in times of conflict. And until next time, take care, and we'll see you in the next episodes.